Welcome back to Nebraska Hawks Nest. I am joined here by the founder, the godfather himself of HawkeyeNation.com, Jon Miller. Sir, how you doing today?
I'm well. That opening was great. And you know what? The best things in life are borrowed. I'm going to be doing that for my new venture as opposed to a countdown clock. That's what I'm going to do, a highlight reel. So thank you for the idea.
Hey, if you need somebody to help you out, I know one of Jerry's relatives from Nebraska Hawks Nest put that together for us. So he did a pretty good job. I'm sure he'd be more than willing to help out with something like
Yeah,
that.
that'd be great. I'll be hitting you up after the show.
Heck yeah. All right. Well, we'll hook you up, Jon. Wanted to start out with, or give you maybe some compliments here. I don't know how comfortable you're going to be with this, but you're definitely one of the founding fathers of this whole, social media deal with Hawkeye Nation and everything that went on with that. And Hawkeye Nation has blown up to be one of the biggest social media outlets for the Hawkeyes today. Can you tell us how the infancy of that, how that got started, where that idea came from, and a little bit about your journey, how
Sure.
it's grown over the years?
Yeah, so when I was 13 back in 1984, I told my dad that when I grew up, I was going to be the voice of the Iowa Hawkeyes. I've known what I've wanted to do and be for a long time. And because I realized that the MBA was an unlikely route for me as a career. So I went to college at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, as my family had moved from West Branch, where I grew up, over to the Peoria, Illinois area in March of my junior year of high school. And SIU had a really good television and radio broadcasting school. So I went there, got the degree in radio and television broadcasting. Worked at an NBC TV affiliate in Peoria, Illinois in 1994 before I realized I don't want to work in local television because the hours for me were not going to be conducive to someday having a family. So I got out of that. Now we're in the 94, 95, 96, got into energy, moved to Kansas City. And then around 98, 99, the internet really started to grow. It wasn't a thing really all that much widely commercially in 96, 97, but it started to really pick up some steam in the late 1990s. And in 1999, the summer, I started to email my thoughts and opinions on Hawkeye athletics to my family and friends, and they started to forward it to their family and friends. And within 6 months, I had a 5,000 person email distribution list back when email was really just getting going. And when I started doing the Miller Time newsletter, which was what that was, the term blog had not even been invented yet. So if there's such a thing as an OG blogger, sports blogger, I'm in that group of people because the term didn't exist before I started doing it. I didn't invent it, but I'm one of the old timers. So from there, Rivals.com version 1.0, a corporation in the late 90s that had $100 million worth of venture capital behind them, found me, asked me if I would do what I was doing in my email distro for them, said, this is great. They paid me $1,000 a month. I thought, righteous, this is fantastic. And so I was selling propane at that time and blogging about the Hawkeyes. And I really wanted to blog about the Hawkeyes and not do the propane thing. And then in 2000, the .com crash happened. And in November of 2000, shortly after the October crash, I'm like, I think things are going to get a little dicey with this network. I'm going to go ahead and go buy a URL and maybe go out on my own one day. And I was listening to a lot of Jim Rome at the time, who was really starting to develop a footprint outside of his native California. And he always talked, Raider Nation. JT the Brick was a big caller on his show talking about Raider Nation. I'm like, I'm going to get Hawkeye Nation. So in November of 2000, I reserved HawkeyeNation.com. And on April 14th of 2001, I started HawkeyeNation.com. And from there, it was basically I bought a cooler that had a handle and wheels. And I would go print off 1,000 copies. One page had the Iowa football roster. The back page had please come visit Hawkeye Nation or something like that. And I would literally pull that around the parking lots at Kinnick at 5 and 6 in the morning on home games in 2001 to spread. I was out kissing babies and shaking hands. And from there, it just grew and grew and grew.
All right. Well, that's super interesting. I didn't realize that you had put that different aspect into it. Tell us about your family life while doing that. I'm sure that probably took a ton of time. Was it a difficult thing balancing family life and being married with getting everything really up and off the ground?
Well, I think with that, I mean, I'm sure looking back on it, there were times, well, there have been numerous times where my wife's not been as thrilled because typically it always seems like Sunday night you're having dinner together, and that's when kids commit to the football program
Mhm.
because they're either just getting on an airplane to go back home after their visits, or they've gotten home from their visits and they make those announcements on Sunday nights. So I remember one time being in Kansas City at a pizza shop and get a text from someone say, hey, someone's going to commit, and I got to go home and write about it. So yeah, there's that. But probably no different than most people who are entrepreneurs and have their own company. If you are an entrepreneur and you have your own business, which is what I've always viewed my career in blogging as, you do what you've got to do when you have to do it. That's it. There's no getting around it. And over time, you as a spouse, husband and wife, or partner, whatever, you learn how to live in that relationship based upon the demands on it from making the living. So yeah, it wasn't easy, but you learn how to do it. And there's never been a vacation I've ever taken in my adult and married life, now nearly 23 years of marriage, that I haven't worked. But when work is something you love, and I love my energy, I'm a partner in my own energy company. And now I've started HawkeyePodcast.com, and I've got a couple partners in that. When you love what you do, it's not work.
Tell us about HawkeyePodcast.com. That's something, like you said, a newer venture. I've heard a little bit of buzz going on about that. Tell us what you have going on with there.
So I retired after the Holiday Bowl in 2019 from HawkeyeNation.com. I had sold that business to some friends of mine back in 2013 when I moved from Des Moines to Oklahoma to get back into the energy industry. But I kept writing for the website for a number of years. And I just felt like I needed to focus that season of life in 2020, focus on my energy company with no other real distraction. So I logged off, if you will, resigned from Hawkeye Nation. I wasn't on Twitter for a couple of months. Then the pandemic hit in March of, about a year ago right now. About a year ago right now is when I started to tweet again. I didn't tweet in January or February during that very fun basketball season, and it darn near killed me to not be interacting with people. And then I'm like, I want to interact with people because I can't go anywhere. So I got on Twitter. And then as the summer went on and started to think about this basketball season that I knew we would have, I'm like, I can't not be a part of this. Not just Jon Miller getting a show again or doing that. That's not, I can't not be a part of this being around the Hawkeye fans, because that's been my entire life. I was a Hawkeye fan before I was a Hawkeye Nation. And I remain someone that wants Iowa to win every single game they play, but I am critical when I need to be. And I just felt like I want to get back into this. So in late October of 2020, just a few months ago, I said, hey, I'm going to come back and do this. I'm going to do it on Patreon. I'm not going to have message boards. It's not going to be anything like it used to be, because I only have so much time, and I can't take away from my priority, which is my energy company. And it grew. Had an old buddy of mine that I used to work with at WHO Radio in Des Moines back when I was a sports director there. He has started his own advertising agency, and he's like, hey, will you take ads on your Patreon page? And I said, not really. There's only a few hundred people. It's kind of a fun time. It's not really a good reach anyway. We then talked a couple of weeks later about what if I took something free and made a free site, made the podcast free. I said, I'm never doing message boards again, and I'm not doing comments on stories ever again. And okay, that's fine. So then I thought about Mark Morehouse for the Cedar Rapids Gazette, who also resigned from his post with the Gazette in October, which I had no idea about. Called up Mark. I said, what do you think, Mark? How about we do something together? And after a few days, he said, sure, let's do it. So me and Mark and John Liebels, the person who used to work for WHO, who now has his own ad agency, we launched HawkeyePodcast.com on March 4th, very recently. And we're going to have podcasts. We do live instant reaction videos after the games. There's going to be written commentaries, no message boards, no comment sections. It's just going to be us writing and talking and allowing fans to interact with us on the YouTube live. YouTube.com/Hawkeye podcast. That's there. So it's a stripped down version and this is what I really like about what I've done version, and not including the things I no longer like about what I used to do version.
I kind of get the feeling from talking to you that you were a little burned out on the message boards aspect of it. Now, at times, I had gotten onto those message boards, and I'm sure you're well aware of how toxic they can become. I started to feel like my fandom was being very, very negative, especially during the time of the 4-8 season. And when Kirk had some of those struggles, it got to be something that was very toxic. Walk us through a little bit of the trials and tribulations of the message boards and maybe some of the craziest things you saw on there.
So I started to hang out on message boards in 1996. And at that time, the Big Ten had their own message board. Big10.org had their own fan forums. Each school had its own message board. And let me tell you, I have not been around a Wild West as wild as that was, because there was no moderation. It was just left alone, and it got crazy. And the Iowa board, I kind of was a very frequent poster on there. So I dabbled in there, and then I didn't come back around to it till 98, and I'd moved to Denver. And so I just finally got a new handle called Denver Hawk. If some of you are like old school and you remember that, you are on the first seat of the bus, and we would battle with the Illini fans. It was crazy, and it just got into my bloodstream. I loved it. I loved the debate. I loved the sport of debate, and I kind of tried not to do that anymore because I think there's too much of that in the world today. But that's where I started with the message boards, and then back in like 2000 or 2001, Iowa lost a late season game to Wisconsin in basketball, and I'd had enough of the negativity, and I pushed a button that shut the message boards down. I went out with my friends, and I didn't want the message boards to run amok. And I took a lot of heat for that. When Iowa hired Kirk Ferentz during that process, I was, had been built up superhawkeye.com. I had to create sorry, I'm getting on the edge of my chair here because I'm getting fired up. I had to create an additional message board so that I could pigeonhole the Bowlesby sucks, he should have fired Bob Stoops questions and comments that were flooding the boards after Kirk Ferentz was named head coach. So it was crazy enough that I had to make a whole separate message board just so I could pigeonhole that so that it didn't take over the primary football board. And man, there were people that, you do this a long enough time and you talk in textual format. People sometimes can take you the wrong way when you didn't mean to be a jerk, or you meant to be a jerk and it sounds like you were a jerk. So along the way, I'd picked up a few people that didn't care for me and banned a bunch of people. There was one time in 2012-ish where I banned about 15 or 20 people that were just causing what I felt was a disruption on the message boards. They went and started their own message board that was like a, Hawkeye Nation Wasteland is what they called it. And it was pretty bad. They said some pretty bad things. I think it's funny now. And I went there for about a year and it really started to get under my skin. In about 2013, 2014, I made a decision. I'm never going to search my name again to see what people are saying about me on the internet. For one, it's kind of egotistical and arrogant to do that, which I did. And I was. I'm like, I'm not doing that anymore. And that was really, I began to stop taking myself as seriously as I used to do. And right now, as I approach the age of 50, you can say whatever you want to say about me. I really don't care. And I'm not looking for it. And I'm probably not going to see it. So knock yourself out.
It's a pretty freeing feeling though to not give a crap, just to let go and be like, hey, I don't really care.
It's the best feeling. I wish I would have gotten there at the age of 40, you know?
yeah, and that's gonna piss people off too. I feel like we're at around age of 34, 35. I finally was like, I've spent way too much of my life really caring about what people that don't matter think. And
Right.
once you do it, once you're able to free yourself of that, that's such a weight lifted off your shoulders that it's undescribable if you haven't done it before. But I think that's a super healthy approach
Right.
on how to handle that. But I remember those message boards. I had to get off of those because I mean, you get wrapped up in that stuff, and you make yourself a not as good version of yourself, a negative version of yourself.
Right. And think if that's your daily office. Think of
Yeah.
how you carry that home. I mean, I just got to the point where like I'm done. And the last several years that where I was at Hawkeye Nation, I probably went to the message boards less than once a month. And other people that I was working with had the unfortunate task of monitoring those. And I'm like, I'm not going to be associated with message boards again. And I'm not like saying I'm better than people that enjoy message boards. If you enjoy message boards, that's great. I've been there, done that, wrote the book,
Yeah.
and I'm out.
There's some people out there that you can tell have a lot of their self-worth built into their presence on some of those boards. But really wanted to ask you too about back in, I believe it was 2015-ish, you had made a comment around that time about Coach Ferentz, how you felt like things had kind of passed him by. And then, and I got to be honest,
2014.
14. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. We 1 year off. And I got to be honest.
I've been a real big idiot if I would have said that in 2015.
That's true. That's true. So in 14, which I'm going to be honest with you, from, a couple years before that, I was right there with you. I was very vocal about it. I thought it was time for a change and time for us to move on. And I'm not going to, hold your feet to the fire on anything on that, because I feel like most Hawkeye fans felt that way. But later on, you came out which you didn't have to do, and said, "Hey, I was wrong. I was wrong about this," which I had to swallow my pride and say I was wrong too. I was calling for the hashtag fire Ferentz too. Can you walk us through a little bit about that process? Your thoughts on making that statement, which a lot of us did, and then really having the character to stand up and say, hey, I think I was wrong.
Well, one of the things that I learned a long time ago, and I feel it's important, and I just did that again recently 2 weeks ago, is if you're wrong and you are in the public eye, as I have, when I say public eye, we're talking, I'm not like some mega star or even a small star.
Come on, John.
People are aware of me in certain circles. And if you make a living giving opinions, you darn well better be tough-skinned enough to say and admit when you're wrong. Now, in 2014, because recently I just did it because I said that when Jordan Bohannon came out of high school, I didn't think he was a Big Ten caliber guard. Good thing I don't make a living evaluating talent. But in 2014, Kirk was in a weird place. And you could tell in the interviews, he had less patience. He had less tolerance. And I wouldn't really care for suffering media for all the years that he has either. It would get annoying. But that year, something seemed different. And I had also just from Des Moines to Oklahoma. And I think at the subconscious level for sure, but maybe even close to the conscious level, I felt like I needed to show people that I could still matter to Iowa internet circles living in Oklahoma, since I no longer lived in Des Moines. So I became a little more barbed. I became a little more blunt, a little more not toxic's not the word, but much stronger opinions. I might have been more muted in my opinions earlier or criticisms, but I certainly used different terminology to say the same things. And looking back on that year, I don't regret having dissenting opinions relative to the direction of the Iowa football program. I regret how I expressed myself. I expressed myself unfairly, that lacked dignity or class, and that was not reciprocal of respect towards Kirk the way that Kirk had always shown me respect in my career. I haven't talked to Kirk privately since then. I wrote him a letter. I was actually going to send it to him at the start of the 2015 season, but I failed to do that. I sent it to him after the 2015 season. So probably in the back of his mind, he's probably saying, yeah, thanks for the letter after we go 12-0. And he would have every right to do that. But I really intended to do it when I saw Zach Johnson win the British Open that summer before Iowa went undefeated. And I saw Zach, how classy he was in accepting the claret jug. And that's how Zach always lives his life. And it struck me in that moment, Jon, you were an a-hole last year in how you expressed your opinions. Not that I would change my criticism, but I would change how I did it because it was unfair. And then come to find out a year later in early 2016 what the Ferences were going through personally in 2014.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, I mean, I felt horrible. Well, no wonder Kirk was maybe behaving somewhat differently, somewhat less patiently, because, his granddaughter was fighting for her life and would die. And all the pain that was involved with Brian's and loss of their child. And yeah, man, that had an effect on me after the fact that still resonates, that I'm still reminded of. And I will always remember is that when you come across someone who is acting in a way you don't like, or just someone that looks like they're having a bad day, maybe they're having a bad day.
Yeah.
And I can control my attitude. I can control how I deliver my messages. Doesn't mean I'm not going to be critical of Kirk in the future. If there's need to be critical, I will be. It just means I won't be a jerk about it, because that's really the only regret that I have my entire career online.
Hindsight's always 2020, and the important part is that we look back and we grow on those type of things, because I was nowhere near in the spotlight that you were at that time, but I was very vocal and critical about Kirk and very hard on him on social media. And you look back and you see those interviews that when he talks about his granddaughter and the emotions that he has, you see him in the locker room after games, after some wins like Wisconsin this year, where he shows that emotion. And, it's hard not to love the guy and hard not to be emotionally involved with him too. And really want to see a guy that's, that genuine. We want to see him succeed.
No doubt you do. And it's difficult for me. It has been for the majority of my time doing this. And Kirk was hired at Iowa about the same time that I started blogging. And, I was doing it a little before he got hired. So I've been around, he's been around. It's difficult for me to be objective when talking about Kirk because of the respect that I have for him. 2014 notwithstanding, that was more of a me thing than a Kirk thing. Kirk, by the way, the next year hired a consulting company to help him plan out how to communicate better with the media. So Kirk did recognize that he needed some help in that area too. Like I recognize that I needed to chill out in some areas of my life as well. But yeah, it's that time I think is something I will lean on for as long as I do this.
I think that's a really mature, well-rounded way to take a look at that. And, a lot of people just turn a blind eye to things like that in their life and they don't choose to grow from it. So I think that's awesome that you were able to own that and say, hey, I can be better. I should be better. And, if more people did that, we'd probably be a lot more level-headed individuals in life. Wanted to talk to you too a little bit more about the football program, about where you feel like I really feel like with recruiting and where the team is going right now, it seems like we're on an upward trajectory. What do you see for Iowa football over the next 2 years from what you've seen in regards to recruiting and to players we have coming back and results over the last couple of years? Where do you feel like the ceiling for this program is? And do you think it's a legitimate expectation to expect a Big Ten championship? Because it's been quite a while since we've been able to get one.
I think it's a legitimate expectation to make it to the Big Ten championship game over the course of the next 5 years. I think the recruiting, as you mentioned, this past recruiting class is probably their highest rated class since the 2005 class. That 2005 class probably only had a 50% retention rate when all was said and done. Hopefully this class does a little better than that. But this was a phenomenal class, an incredible offensive line class, and that's going to pay dividends 2 to 3 years down the road. Iowa's cumulative recruiting class rankings the last several years combined is one of the highest that it's been in a very long time. Will this program continue to develop players the way that it developed players from the start of the Kirk Ferentz era through the end of the Chris Doyle era? Remains to be seen. I think that they probably will be able to do that. I have high expectations, and I think relative to their peers in the Big Ten West, I think you're looking at still the same cast of characters. Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota flashed a little bit. Not sure that they have the long legs to do that, and we all know that Scott Frost and Nebraska are all hat and no cattle. So don't worry about them too much relative to winning a Big Ten championship, because frankly, they have not been able to make advances in the areas that you need to make advances to win in this division, and that is at the line of scrimmage. And I know that they boasted a great deal when Frost came back, and the strength coach and connections to the old 90s history. They're still a team that's getting punched in the mouth at the line of scrimmage on a daily basis by everyone in this division. So they're a long ways away.
Yeah, well, every single year when you live in Nebraska, like I do, and hence all of us Nebraska Hawks nest, they always think they're a year away. They're a recruit away. They're very close. So definitely not a fan base that's super realistic about expectations, but there's a lot of those out there. Wanted to talk to you as well about Kirk's succession plan. We, as fans, always hear that Brian Ferentz is going to be the next head coach. And then with the things that kind of transpired over the summer, there's been some backtracking on that. Well, that's probably not going to happen now. What are your thoughts on where you see Kirk's career heading? And in a transition, do you feel like that it's going to be a situation where they're going to try to put Brian in that head coaching role? Or in your opinion, do you feel like that they're probably going to look outside the program?
1 year ago, 10 months ago, I would have probably said 2-1 odds that Brian would be the next coach. Now, I don't see that as happening, given a lot of what came out and what was bandied about this past summer, relative to the concerns of, unfair treatment and African American players feeling like they couldn't be themselves within the program. Ultimately, that led to Chris Doyle's firing. That's really what happened. And Kirk Ferentz, we all saw and heard or read his public statements relative to the many former Black players that took to Twitter, including James Daniels, who is as highly respected in that program as anyone that has gone through it. James kind of started the ball rolling, if you will, and the number of former players came out and talked about their feelings, their emotions. Do I think some of those players were maybe jumping on a train and took some poetic liberties relative to what actually transpired? Yes. But do I think the majority of them? I think there was plenty of fact, plenty of meat on the table. There's too many people that had similar stories that there couldn't be a very large segment of truth behind them. And I am white. I've never been the minority. I'm a male. I've never been in that minority. And, I didn't come from a lot of money, but I had two parents. And I mean, I absolutely have lived a very privileged life relative to a number of people in the world. So far be it from me to tell someone or have an opinion representing somebody, some creed, some race, some group that I'm not a part of, and I've never felt or walked a mile in their shoes. So I think that Kirk did the best he could this summer. I think everything he said was genuine. I think that Chris Doyle was absolutely his right-hand man. And no, I don't think that Kirk knew every single thing that went on in the program, but I think he was certainly aware of it. And I think the militant style that program was run under certainly endorsed, if not promoted by Kirk. Now, as for Chris Doyle's specific treatment, bullying, things of that nature, I don't think Kirk had a handbook that Chris just followed. Kirk Ferentz is a macro manager, and he hires competent people to take care of certain things and delegate certain areas. I think Doyle probably went too far. And when you recall back and remember the number of voices that spoke out, I think that's why Chris Doyle ultimately lost his job.
What are your thoughts on what transpired with Urban Meyer trying to bring Coach Doyle into the Jacksonville Jaguars? The immediate backlash on, channels like ESPN and Fox Sports and local, national radio outlets really condemning the hire. And then you have some backlash from former players too, saying, can the guy move on with his life and get another job? What are your thoughts on how that all transpired?
I think say to Urban Meyer, this ain't college. This is the NFL now, and you don't have the control that you do when you're a college head coach. Matter of fact, that as much as anything, that is a perfect example of how much control that college football coaches have. It's not that way in the NFL. Urban Meyer just found that out the painful way. So that was a very big misstep by Urban. Chris Doyle's resignation wasn't even 7 months old. And you do that. And as for the voices of some former players saying, well, shouldn't Doyle be to go on and live his life? They're certainly entitled to that opinion. But it's not even been a year since all that transpired. And I would say to everybody, read the room.
Yeah, that's a good point. Do you feel like Coach Doyle was given enough of a forum to be able to explain himself and say his side of the story from everything that had transpired?
He's got a Twitter account, and he could have called a press conference, and every media outlet in the state of Iowa would have been at his house. So then that, begs the question, why didn't he do that? My guess is because that was probably a part of a settlement agreement. If I'm going to Occam's razor this thing.
Yeah.
But he has platforms. He could have called a press conference and he could have gotten his side out, if you will, in addition to the statement that he did release on Twitter that I think was an ill-crafted statement and very ham-fisted. And again, an improper reading of the room and the climate at the time.
And a little bit of the reason that he got into the situation that he's in to begin with. Just not able to get a proper reading of the room, like you said, and not maybe the appropriate response at the appropriate time. Want to go to
think of this for a second. Think if you walk up on a pride of lions, and there's one lion who's the head of the pack, as is the way with pack animals in nature, and that lion's taking care of business. Everyone knows their order in the pecking order, and it's beneath the main lion. Think if you remove the lion's teeth and you remove the lion's claws when he's sleeping. He might wake up and feel that his teeth are gone, but that lion's not going to realize until he gets in a scrap that he no longer has teeth or he no longer has fangs. And those other lions in the pride aren't going to realize that the king boss lion doesn't have teeth or fangs until he gets in a scrap. But once they realize, that he doesn't have teeth or fangs, things are a little bit different. And I think when Chris released that statement, he had not yet registered that he'd been declawed and defanged. And you're right. That seemed a little representative of the type of total control, that world that he had been operating under for 2 decades.
No, I like that analogy. That explains it perfectly. That's really well said. And at the end of the day, I've talked to a lot of former players about this, as I'm sure you have, and everybody just wants to grow from it, to move on, to see everybody be happy and be better for it. And I think, especially as seriously as Kirk has taken all this, it really seems like it's gonna be. The program's going to be better off for it. We're going to be in a better position for it. And, looking at the program over the years, it seemed like we might have had a little too much of a buttoned up approach, not enough of a, laid back, let the guys be themselves type of approach. Do you feel like that those changes are going to be a really big positive impact on the program?
I mean, I think it's a positive impact culturally and socially, because the current players talked about how they could feel like they could be themselves within the locker room. And that's a good thing. To go and operate in a setting where you can't be yourself is not a good thing. So as to whether or not that loosening of the reins is going to translate into more wins on the field, I don't know. But even if it doesn't, you can't go back and clamp down the way that things were. That, genie is out of the bottle. So we'll see. We'll see. I saw some former players early on when Iowa was 0-2 and they had a ton of penalties against Purdue and Northwestern. I think it was actually, I'm not just going to go ahead and not name names. And I like these guys on the Washed Up Walk-Ons podcast, Tyler Kluver, Drake Kulik, and Ryan Ward. They were like, yeah, this is to be expected because the discipline's not there. Something along those lines. You can go back and listen for yourself. Well, and they won 6 in a row. I, too, was concerned when they went 0-2 that Kirk had lost the locker room and bad things were about to happen. But then they won 6 in a row. There weren't mass transfers out of the program. The players in the program still clearly and dearly love Kirk Ferentz. And Iowa lost maybe 1 commitment out of their class, given everything that went down.
Yeah.
And given the climate of the world last summer, that's about as bad of a situation as you could have from a public relations standpoint. But there weren't mass transfers. There weren't mass defections from the recruiting class. We'll see how these next recruiting classes look. But COVID, I think, right now has more to do with how small the numbers are than anything else, because it's similar for many programs.
How surprised were you when we had that recruiting class and all of this transpired, and as the summer went on into fall, and we really held on to one of the best recruiting classes we've had under the Kirk Ferentz era? Because I know that as fans, a lot of people were like, all right, here we go. These guys are going to decommit. They're going to be out of here, and we're going to drop down the recruiting charts. How surprised were you that we were able to hold on to all those guys?
I was thinking, man, this is a good time not to have a website. Yeah, I was surprised. I was surprised that they were able to do that they were able to keep so many of these players, that they were able to keep so many of the players in the program. Yes, there were some players that left, but I think when you look at depth chart and things of that nature, those explanations would fall into the normal category. So again, Occam's razor is one of my favorite ways with which to view the world and answer problems. The simplest explanation is often the right one. And the simplest explanation, in my opinion, is that these players still love Kirk Ferentz. They don't feel that Kirk Ferentz was or is a problem along the lines of the things that came out this summer, or they had enough respect for him to overcome some things they felt that maybe he should have been aware of and or taken actions on or against. So yeah, I was surprised, but I think that what we haven't seen is encouraging.
I want to circle back to what we were just talking about with the slow start, with the 0-2 start to the season last year. What things do you really attribute that to? Because it really seemed that we were very pass heavy those first few games. And I know without Spencer having, spring ball, he didn't get as many reps as possible, but we on offense, we looked extremely out of sync and didn't seem to have the balance that we typically do. What are your thoughts on what you saw those first two games?
Yeah, it looked like a program that forgot or didn't know what its identity was offensively. Over either 51 or 50 passes against Northwestern.
For a
In
first-year starter.
Yeah, in a game that you were ahead by multiple scores at one point in time. I can't remember what the halftime score was. In a game that you never trailed by any more than, what was it, a point or a few.
Yeah.
And a kid that was making his second ever start, and you're putting that much pressure on him, that was a coaching failure. Brian Ferentz called a very bad game that game. And that's one I'm sure that they wish that they had back. You shouldn't put that much pressure on someone that's not ready for it yet. I think Spencer Petras destroys it in practice. I think he absolutely is scintillating in practice. But then when he gets out onto the field, at least this first year, he can't slow down. It's kind of like Joe Toussaint for most of this year in basketball and last year. Out of control, gets too excited, can't pull the reins back and play within himself. And we saw Drew Tate do that a lot in his first year as a starter. But within the game, Drew could find that Zen moment. Chill. The game against Wisconsin, the last game of the season in 2004, he throws two horrible high interceptions over the middle in the first half, which that's what happens when you're too amped up. Your footwork gets bad. Footwork is everything for a quarterback, and then the ball sails on him. So I saw Spencer for the most of the year. It was just inconsistent footwork because he's going through things too darn fast. George Brett, my all-time favorite baseball player, once said, sometimes you have to try a little easier. And that's what I hope more than anything Spencer learns between year one and year two. But a key thing to point out, and every former player and coach I've talked with and current coaches that I've listened to say this, the number of reps that Spencer and the entire team, but certainly Spencer, didn't get last spring, we're talking thousands. And last summer, we're talking thousands of reps that he didn't have because spring practice was canceled due to COVID-19. And that is an enormous factor. And Spencer looked like somebody who was really raw, really wants to do well, has all the tools in the shed relative to arm strength, all the throws that he can make. He just didn't have the reps. And anything in life, I don't care if it's quarterback or what we are doing here, reps make you better, more polished, more comfortable. When I started doing the Jon Miller show in 2006 on 1460 Cakes, they gave me a radio show when they shouldn't have. I had a 20-minute opening monologue to fill. Terrified, nightmare, horrible. I was horrible. Now I can talk on my own podcast for 45 minutes without anybody being there with 2 or 3 words written down at topics. I'm not saying I'm great at it. I'm just saying it's reps. It's confidence. Spencer missed out a ton.
How do you see him transitioning this coming season with fans in the stadium, with him getting amped up and fired up playing? Do you feel like that's going to be another hurdle for him to cross?
Could be, but I really think and believe that he has all the tools in the shed, the toolbox to make those throws. This is not a physical deficiency with him. It's between the ears and maturing and finding that Zen place that I talked about earlier with Drew Tate. And we'll have to find out. But I'm feeling very confident that if he's healthy, he'll be the starting quarterback in Iowa's first game. And I think the reps that he will get this spring season and this normal-ish summer that I think they're going to have will make a huge difference.
Does Deuce Hogan stick around?
Yeah. I mean, Deuce is a freshman. He's got 5, he can redshirt. Yeah. I mean, he could be a 3-year starter. I mean, how many 3-year starters in a given year do you see at the Big Ten?
Yeah.
Probably less than 50%.
Not many.
2-year starters is more common. 3 years isn't as common. 4 years is highly uncommon. So even to get a chance to be a 2-year starter, I think we're a long ways down the road from that. The kid from Colorado, whose name is escaping me right now, maybe somebody like that, Alex Padilla.
Yep.
That might be a different discussion because he's a year closer to Spencer Petras in age. But and these are, I'm not pushing anybody out. These are obvious. These are real conversations going on. But Deuce could be a 3-year starter.
Okay, that's just a little bit of grumblings. Fans had a little bit, some worry going on that, if he doesn't get out and get at the plate, because he's been a very eccentric, vocal, outspoken guy. But it's been all positive stuff too. So I think fans have really high hopes for him, and we obviously do for Spencer as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that those guys are one play away, one injury away from being the starting quarterback. Yeah. And so I think we're a good full, I think there's going to be a wide open quarterback competition this spring. And as Kirk is fond of saying, Spencer, if you lose the job, shame on you because you're the incumbent. And if it's really close, then that's a different story. But if it's not close, every player on the team knows that it's not close. Where you get into trouble is when you have a Jake Christensen playing ahead of a Ricky Stanzi when in practice, Ricky's the more consistent and better player, but Kirk feeling like he has so much invested in Jake, and Ken O'Keefe favoring Ricky Stanzi, and then they start playing this game, we'll play somebody for a half, and that's where you get into trouble and can risk losing a team. And Jake Rudock and CJ Beathard.
I was going to ask you about that one specifically.
When CJ can make plays in practice that these guys haven't seen before. Rudock's more steady, but Rudock's ceiling here, the rest of the team sees that CJ's ceiling is here, even though he isn't as consistent as steady. The team wants the superstar possibility. It's human nature.
Yeah. Moving over to basketball, because it's basketball season, so we got to talk about the Hawkeyes going into the Big Ten tournament. There's been a lot of inconsistent performances. This is a different team, but there's been a lot of inconsistent performances in the postseason out of Iowa basketball over the last, 15, 20 years. Where do you see this team ending up in the Big Ten tournament? And how far do you really feel like that they're not necessarily capable of going, but where you see them, how far do you see them making it?
Well, Big Ten, a lot depends on the injury to Joe Wieskamp, but let's make the assumption for the NCAA tournament that Wieskamp is 100% and can go. I think Iowa, by virtue of winning their last 3 games, beating Ohio State opened up some new possibilities. And then winning their last 2 games solidified those. I think they're going to be no worse than a 2 seed now. And, the 2 seed plays a 15 in the first round. And then I think you have your next games against potentially it's a very, very favorable 7-10 in the next round. So then you're in the Sweet 16 and you only had to beat somebody who was seeded as high as 7th. So I think it's really fortuitous for them. I think that 2 seed puts them in a really good position. And then in the round of Sweet 16, maybe you have to face that 3 seed and then the Elite 8. You got the 1 seed to contend with, but boy, wouldn't that be a fun problem to have? So to me, I think with a healthy Wieskamp, if this team doesn't make the Sweet 16, that's a letdown. If they make the Sweet 16, and these things are all a matter of opinion, and how you feel is the right answer for you. To me, if Iowa makes a Sweet 16, I will feel like this has been a successful season.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, at least an appearance in the, the Big Ten tournament championship, because Michigan's one hell of a basketball team. I feel like if they at least make it to the end there, then at least hit the Sweet 16 to Elite 8 range, that's my opinion. Where I would at that point pass, then it's straight gravy from there. So
does that mean they got to beat Illinois potentially in the semifinals of the Big Ten tournament? I mean, if if they have to do that to make you feel good, brother, you might be in for a disappointing weekend.
I think we got Illinois. I think we got them.
Not without a healthy Joe Wieskamp, they don't.
No, I agree with that. Absolutely. If Joe Wieskamp's healthy, I feel like I think we can win that game. But they are a great team too. So if we weren't able to get past Illinois, that wouldn't be a shocker as well, because they are tough, especially what they did without their best player to Michigan. Just that shocked me, to having a performance like that in that type of situation, being down your best guy. Nobody saw that coming.
No, I didn't. I had a little action on Michigan that night, and so I certainly didn't see it coming.
Oh, it was wild. Before we let you go, want to ask you, you have had the luxury of being able to talk to more former, current players and coaches through all of the different, sports that the University of Iowa puts on the field or on the court. Who are some of the most interesting, oddball, funny characters that you've had the luxury of being able to talk to? Some guys that you were just like, God, this guy's nuts. Like, you got guys out there that are super interesting, like a Matt Roth, a Drew Tate, Pat Anger, guys that just really don't care what anyone thinks about them.
Well, you just hit the guys that were in my head, and that's okay, because they're in my head because they are they're the setup for what you asked. Matt Roth was, yeah, that guy was just wired up a little different. There were times where I'm like, okay, I wonder what Matt, if football doesn't work out, what Matt, what's he going to do? And he figured things out. But yeah, he was an intense dude. There was one time I asked a question to Drew Tate. It was I think in the spring of 03, or maybe it was 04, and you're in media gatherings and it's like 10 arms are reaching in microphones in front of one person's face. And I got long arms, so I'm kind of in the back and I'm looking around for somebody else to interview. And I just am kind of on autopilot, and I don't even remember the question that I asked. And there was silence and it was so awkward. So I looked around and Drew said something back. Like, it was a really smart ass reply that he gave me. Like, dude, what kind of question? Something like that. And he was right, though. It was a dumb question. But then, Reggie Evans was a very interesting interview. He would always say big time. And, that was kind of a nickname for him. I lived in Kansas City at the time when he was at Coffeyville, Kansas Community College. I drove down from Kansas City. I still have the game program where I was taking notes on what I saw in Reggie's game before he had committed to Iowa. I'm old. Now that I think about that, but being around Reggie when he heard the news that he was like suspended, and he heard about it from the media and not Coach Alford, that was a real interesting time. One of my favorite memories, though, is of Kyle McCann, and it was beneath the bowels of the Alamo Dome, Iowa's victory against Texas Tech in the Alamo Bowl back in 2001. When after the game, Kirk Ferentz famously and uncharacteristically from the podium said, "Hawks are back, here we go." And he was right when Nate Cadian's in the end zone, directing the orchestra. I'm walking up the tunnel, and I'm about 10 paces behind Kyle McCann, who was the quarterback for that game. And he's sitting there whistling, and I'm not paying any attention to it. And in the hallway, these hallways are about 20 feet wide, so little cars can go through them. The Texas Tech players are on their butts, on the floor, heads and hands. They're inconsolable because they just lost this game. Walking past dozens of them, big guys, obviously football players. It dawns on me about as we're halfway through the tunnel, and I still see a bunch of Texas Tech fans ahead, that Kyle McCann is whistling Deep in the Heart of Texas. That's what he is whistling. Kyle McCann, very reserved Kyle McCann. And Kyle McCann has been a lawyer for me at times on things since his playing days have been over. And I'm like, Kyle, I was right behind you. Are you going to fess up to me? And he just looks at me and doesn't do anything. That's Kyle. He is. I would not want to play poker with him, but he was whistling Deep in the Heart of Texas. Cold freaking blooded, and I'm a little concerned that there's going to be a melee and I'm going to get caught in the middle of this thing. But that's one of my favorite favorite things that never made any, any headlines, highlights, just things that you get a chance to see when you're there.
I thought you were going to tell me that he lifted one of them up and hugged him and, told him how much respect he had for him or something like that. But the deep in the heart of Texas, that's classic.
Deep in the heart of Texas. But that night, and this was back in my drinking days before I gave it up, that night at the hotel bar, I mean, some of my favorite things about bowl games were getting together. The medias all stay at the media hotel and just hanging out in the media hospitality room with all, different, scribes, peers, rivals. But it was so much fun. But that night at the hotel bar, Ed Podolak walks in, and it was me and a couple of other guys in the media. And we sat down drinking beers with Ed for 3 or 4 hours. And I really wish I remembered what was said because it was amazing and would have filled a book. Ed was telling us stories from his playing days. And then the next year, I do remember that story, Ed telling me after the Orange Bowl the following year that he was on the team bus as the Hawkeyes were pulling into Joe Robbie Stadium or whatever the hell they call it now, Hard Rock, ugly place. And all the Iowa fans that were out. And I was having dinner with Ed before the Orange Bowl down in the bowels of the new Orange Bowl or Joe Robbie Stadium, whatever. And we're sitting there talking, and he's got his big old giant championship ring on from the Kansas City Chiefs. And he's just like, John, I've seen a lot of things in this game. This is a horrible Ed Podolak, but I've never seen anything quite like that. I feel like I'm channeling Hulk Hogan, brother. But in his raspy voice, the tears began to well up in his eyes just from the throngs of Iowa Hawkeye fans that lined the bus route that the bus took to come into the stadium. So just fun times. It's been a really good ride. I'm not done yet. I'm really excited about HawkeyePodcast.com and what Mark Morehouse and I are going to do. Mark Morehouse has more stories than I do. He and I are going to be, Mark's going to be telling those stories on live videos and then they get turned into a podcast form later. We're going to be doing that every single week. So if you're a Hawkeye fan, it's free. What else you got to do? Hope you check it out.
I'm definitely going to check it out. I think it's going to be a great show, and I'm excited to watch it. And, I've been following you your whole career and have enjoyed watching your journey. And really, Jerry and I and guys that are doing things like this, just everyone starts out as a fan, and hopefully you continue to always be a fan. But really look up to what you've done, John, and have a ton of respect for you. And we'll continue to follow your career until you decide to hang it up someday. But thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to sit down on Nebraska Hawks Nest and, tell us about some of your life experiences and some of those awesome stories.
Well, you're welcome, Adam. And to those of you Hawkeye fans out there in Nebraska, there for whatever reasons brought you to that state. My heart goes out to you. Continue to fight the good fight and remind your fellow Husker coworkers that next year is longer than a year away.
6 years in a row. Let's make it 7.
And it's darkest before dawn. And sometimes the dawn never comes.
Hey, I think can we use that for a t-shirt? Is that okay? I think we might have to steal that for a t-shirt.
Go ahead.
All right,
I'm
John.
I'm going to steal your intro idea. So
that's totally cool. We're just we'll write something up and we'll just trade. It's all good. All right, John. Thank you so much, man. Have a great rest of the night and go Hawks.
Take care.